Sirius POTUS channel 124 and Sundays on the BBC Parliament channel. Our guest here at the table is John Hofmeister. Dave is our next caller, but John Hofmeister is the former executive of Shell Oil and the author of Why We Hate the Oil Companies. Straight talk from an energy insider. And now we'll go to Dave, joining us from Coolwater, Michigan. Good morning to you, sir.
Oh, good morning. Good morning, John. Yeah, when I listen to the speeches there by Obama, he kind of makes a statement that, as I understand him, it sounds like he's saying, drill less oil, everything will get better. So we should drill less and less till we have absolutely no oil, close down all the oil wells in the entire world, and gas will drop down to 50 cents a gallon. Isn't that sounding kind of wrong? And then he promotes things like solar and wind, which by my calculations, I read this in Home Car Magazine, my electric bill would go from maybe $200 to $300 a month to $2,000 or $3,000 a month if it were powered by solar and wind. So that doesn't seem very good either. That seems like kind of he wants to put us on an energy that costs 10 times the price of oil. And then this talk about how oil is a world commodity. Isn't everything pretty much a world commodity? I mean, corn and beans and everything like that. So even labor, because people go to the cheapest labor market, so everything's globalized anyway. I think it's kind of a silly argument. Well, just go in the global market. Well, everything goes there anyway. So,
Dave, thanks for the call.
Yes, in reality, we live in a world where markets don't recognize national boundaries for the most part, and any commodity, whether it's iron ore, whether it's orange juice, whether it's gasoline, whether it's crude oil, and you mentioned corn and agricultural products. Yes, global trade is critical to keep the world in good shape. And so the issue of wind and solar and biofuels is a whole nother discussion where in my book I do talk about the importance of all forms of energy, but that wind and solar are in their infancy. And the amount of energy produced for the amount of cost to create that energy is a very, very high cost source at today's technology. We can get better, and I'm sure we will over the next 10 to 20 years, but what we need is a long-term comprehensive plan that takes the 0 to 10 year period into account, the 10 to 25 year period into account, and then the 25 to 50 year period into account, and let's transition intelligently with the technologies we know. The primary technology we know today is fossil fuel, coal, oil, and natural gas. And we can't just write that off, but some people want to. But the whole country is using about 95% of its energy sources from traditional sources that include coal, oil, natural gas, nuclear, and hydropower, or dams, if you will. And so the entire country needs a continuation for the 95+% of its energy every day, and wind and solar can become more popular and more frequent in the future, but not overnight. It doesn't happen that quickly.
From last month's Christian Science Monitor, why gas prices are on the rise despite less demand, and the essence of it is that Americans are using less fuel. We are more energy efficient. China and India are the reason why we're seeing higher prices. Can you explain?
Yes, the demand from these huge countries is growing by double-digit percentages, between 10 and 12% per year. And so while China has gone to 9 million barrels a day and on its way to 15, the U.S. has gone from 20 to 18 and a half. India has gone from 4 to 7. So that's, if you count we'll go to 7 by 2015 as well. That's about 10 million more barrels per day, every day, that has to be produced by all the global oil companies. The reality is nobody knows where that oil could come from. In this country, where we have plenty of abundant supplies of oil and natural gas, my whole point is let's go back to 10 million barrels. That still doesn't cover the gap with all the imports that we need, but then we can use natural gas. So if we go to 10 million barrels of crude to make gasoline, then let's use natural gas to make methanol, and that for about 3 million barrels a day. Let's use ethanol, which we're on a pathway to do, for 2 million barrels a day. Now we're at 15. Let's use hydrogen fuel cells down the road for additional less dependence on oil, but then more efficient automobiles could help us with about 2 million barrels a day. We're at 17. 17 versus 18. And then let's do deals with Canada and Mexico to help us with a North American free trade agreement on oil for technology exchange. Mexico could welcome use of American technology to increase their oil production. Canada has an abundance of oil, and if they don't sell it to the U.S., they're going to sell it to China. They're our next door neighbor. Why would we tolerate not doing business with the Canadians so that they can do business with the Chinese and harm ourselves in the process? And so we can cover the 18 to 20 million barrels a day with that kind of a plan. We're not going to drill our way to 20 million barrels a day. That's not going to happen. But 10, why not?
This chart is not going to surprise you, but it's from a website, California Fuel Prices, that keeps track of prices in California, which is, outside of Hawaii, among the highest in the nation. And if we can go to that chart, you'll see just how significantly gas prices have increased in California, with on average, I think we can, if we go to it, about $5 or $5.50 per gallon in many California service stations.
That's a very serious problem. California has higher priced gasoline than much of the country, largely because of the state tax on gasoline. Also, the fuel standard in gasoline has to make certain air quality requirements, which causes the refineries to operate more expensively. And so it becomes very expensive. So when Rex Tillerson says he doesn't believe $5 gasoline will hit, maybe that's not on a national average, but there are people, real people, in states in this country that are now paying $5 or more. That's just unconscionable in my mind when we live in such abundance that we're not allowed to touch.
And our next call is from California. Bill on the phone, Santa Rosa. Good morning to you, sir.
Yes, good morning. When we refine crude oil, we get a number of products other than fuels, such as plastics and fertilizers and other chemicals. If we rely less on crude oil for our fuel needs in the future, how will that affect the prices of these other products?
Well, when you refine a barrel of oil, here's a way to think about it. A barrel of oil contains 42 gallons. About a third of the barrel is considered heavy oil, and it often is used for, let's say, marine fuel or to make asphalt. The middle of the barrel is called middle distillate, and that's about a third, and that's to make diesel, aviation fuel, and fuel oil for heating. The top third of the barrel is generally lighter molecules that turn into gasoline and the other kind of chemicals that you're referring to. So if we produce less crude oil, not only will the price of gasoline rise, but so will the price of everything else. Because we are an oil-based economy. And whether people like that or not, that's the reality. And we can't pretend that oil is a thing of the past, because it's not. Everything we make, the makeup that people put on their faces, comes much of it from crude oil. A lot of refined chemicals are turned into pharmaceuticals that people's lives depend upon from crude oil. There are many clothes that are made from crude oil, and the nylon fibers that come out of the crude oil refining process. So this is not just about gasoline and diesel. This is about everything else that touches us that we make from crude oil. And in addition, don't forget, all food is transported by truck at some point. All of our clothing, all of the things we buy in department stores or at Target or Kmart or wherever we shop, it's all delivered by truck. Our mail is delivered by truck. Everything is delivered by transportation vehicles. And so the higher price of crude oil filters through every other part of the economy, including airplane tickets, where airlines use enormous amounts of aviation fuel. So it touches every part of our life if we don't have adequate supplies of crude oil, until we have a plan to transition. And we don't have a plan to transition away from crude oil that makes any sense whatsoever.
More broadly on this issue, this morning, Tom Friedman in the New York Times, pass the books, hold the oil. He says, who's going to win in the...
Any sense whatsoever.
More broadly on this issue, this morning, Tom Friedman in the New York Times, pass the books, hold the oil. He says, who's going to win in the 21st century? His point is the nation's invested in education. And I mention that because this Twitter comment from Joseph Ramirez says, Mr. Hofmeister, Tom Friedman says in his book that the best thing for America is $5 per gallon gas. Can you explain?
I don't like it when elites tell the American people what the answer is? The American people have the pragmatism, the knowledge, and the awareness of real life to know better what the answers are. Now, I do agree with Tom Friedman that education is critical to economic success. I read his column this morning. It's brilliant. But I would say in criticism, he should be saying both and. We can't run this economy without crude oil and other fossil fuels as well as alternative fuels, alternative energy. And we need education. I see no problem with doing both, educating our population and exploiting the natural resources. Taiwan has no natural resources. Many other countries in the world have no natural resources. We're blessed. And we have rule of law. And we have regulations that keep companies honest in the way in which they go about doing business. So the combination of education, and we are, I would not dismiss American education for a moment, because we are the world's leading innovator. We're the world's leading laboratory of medical science and so many other scientific endeavors, whether it's aerospace or whether it's the oil industry. The technology in the oil industry is equivalent to the technology in aerospace. That's because of education. So we need both education and we need natural resource production, because not everybody was born to be a scientist.
Our guest is John Hofmeister, and Lenny is joining us from Brooklyn, New York. Democrats line, good morning.
Yes, good morning. Something confuses me, because I remember when the profit one oil company would make would be $4 billion. Now they're making $40 billion. So now if they cut the price of oil in half, their profit would be $20 billion. So is $20 billion too little for the oil companies?
It's important to know, where does that profit go? And ExxonMobil and Rex Tillerson, who was referred to earlier in this session, also announced in New York last week that ExxonMobil was going to spend over $150 billion in capital investment in the next 5 years. $150 billion in capital investment just to keep producing roughly the same amount of oil that they do today, plus some growth, and natural gas as well. So the $150 billion of capital investment has to come from the profit. So what profit that they're talking about, and you're correct to say that the numbers have risen dramatically, as has the oil price risen dramatically. If we were to get ahead of ourselves and start producing more oil than the world needs, we would see the price drop. But that's been the problem. We have not been able to get ahead of global demand, and all the companies, whether ExxonMobil or Chevron or ConocoPhillips or Shell, my former company, or BP, we can't get ahead of the demand. Guess what? People around the world want to live like Americans do. And in order to live like Americans do, it's predicated on more oil. So for this country to deny its citizens our own natural resources, causing us to pay these extraordinary high prices, is really government control, a new form of taxation that hasn't been voted on, and it is a demeaning lifestyle when you pull up to a gas tank, as somebody told me yesterday, and put $80 of gas in their tank when it used to cost less than $60. I said, what did I do wrong that I have to now spend $80? Well, she did nothing wrong. And the fact of the matter is, her government did wrong. Her government did wrong, not just this administration, but the prior administration and the one before that and the one before that, by denying access to America's natural resources.
Scott King kind of closes the loop on an earlier point. Can't we blame U.S. companies for the increased demand on oil in China, in part because shipping, manufacturing there, living standards increased over there, we're shipping our jobs to China and also hurting the U.S. economy?
It is true that there is a lot of transportation back and forth between China and the United States, which never occurred before. But what's really driving demand in China are car sales and truck sales. Last year alone, Chinese consumers bought more than 20 million new cars. Many of those cars are first-time buyers. That's a new gas tank that needs a new delivery of gasoline, or a new truck that demands a new delivery of diesel fuel that didn't exist the year before. This year they'll buy another 20 million new cars. And so it is not replacing cars as much as buying new cars that's growing the fleet in China that is causing this surge in demand, as well as the number of new airplanes that the Chinese now fly. So it is the growing middle class in China that is putting tremendous pressure on oil consumption, and the same in India.
How many years did you spend at Shell?
I was there about 11 years.
I want you to respond to the comments of Eric Holder. He spoke Friday at Georgetown University Law School about the issue of antitrust, its impact on gas prices, and also U.S. oil companies. Let's watch and get your reaction.
Last April, when I established a new part of the task force known as the Oil and Gas Price Fraud Working Group, we have also been focused on identifying civil or criminal violations in the oil and gasoline markets and ensuring that American consumers are not harmed by unlawful conduct. This working group's latest meeting was held at the Justice Department just this morning, and its members discussed a variety of topics, including the role of speculators in the market, recent reports and enforcement matters by various working group members, such as the FTC and the New York Attorney General's office, as well as ways to improve information sharing between working group members and partners. And where do we go from here? I can also report that one of the working group's members, the Federal Trade Commission, is currently conducting an investigation with assistance from other working group members into whether gas prices have been affected by any antitrust violation or market manipulation by refiners or oil producers or transporters, marketers, physical or financial traders, or others.
So let's pick up on that point of market manipulation. Does it happen, and if so, how often?
It's good that we have laws, and it's good that America would enforce its laws. In my experience, in my oil career, which was not my entire career, but a good part of it, I never experienced anything like he's describing. We, every year, had to sign papers that we were following the law. The anti-competition reality sets in hard. We have attorneys in companies, most corporations do, to make sure that no anti-competition behavior occurs. Trading businesses within oil companies, trading businesses within the general market in the United States are guided and advised by attorneys and by rules and procedures. Can I say that manipulation never occurs? I can't say that for sure. Can I argue that if there is manipulation, it is a minor fraction of the market, and I support Eric Holder going after those people if they're violating laws? The American consumers do not need to be cheated by greedy people that would break the law in order to help themselves while harming others. We can't enforce American laws around the world, but generally the practice is, in all of the trading marketplaces, there is government oversight over all of the trading centers, whether that's London, whether that's Singapore. London is a rule of law country. Singapore is a rule country. We're not seeing trading take place in so-called rogue nations, where people might try to take advantage of a lawless state. Real trading, the substance of all trading, takes place through open markets which are governed by regulators in those various countries. So while there may be some manipulation somewhere, I understand that the fraud committee that was appointed has hardly met over the course of its existence in the past year. That was reported in a national newspaper last week. So there isn't much to investigate, it would be the point I make, because companies follow the law. They don't want to go to jail. And every time we would meet as oil executives under the auspices of the American Petroleum Institute, we had an attorney in the room to make sure that our conversation never drifted toward anything that could be considered anti-competitive.
Our guest is John Hofmeister. He is the author of Why We Hate the Oil Companies, Straight Talk from an Energy Insider. Keith is on the phone, El Paso, Texas. Good morning to you, sir.
A national newspaper last week. So there isn't much to investigate, it would be the point I make, because companies follow the law. They don't want to go to jail. And every time we would meet as oil executives under the auspices of the American Petroleum Institute, we had an attorney in the room to make sure that our conversation never drifted toward anything that could be considered anti-competitive.
Our guest is John Hofmeister. He is the author of Why We Hate the Oil Companies, Straight Talk from an Energy Insider. Keith is on the phone, El Paso, Texas. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. I have a question. I notice every time that you see news on the TV that gas prices are going to go up, 5 minutes later at the gas station down on the corner, they're raising the prices. The gas that they have in the ground, they may be paying $80 a barrel for, but at the pump now, we're already being charged that $100 barrel price. How do they get away with that?
It's a very important question, and it's important because what the owner of the local gas station is anticipating is his next delivery, and his next delivery is likely to be at the higher price coming out of the refinery. So what money they can make on the oil that sits in their tanks, and generally they turn their tankage, their supply, every few days, most gas stations get a new delivery. And so they raise their price rapidly when they see the crude oil price going up in anticipation that the next time the tank truck shows up with a delivery, it's going to be at the new higher price. They need the cash to pay or they don't get the delivery.
So why does it take so long for prices to go down when it happens?
That's a phenomenon that happens at the retail station, and you're absolutely right. The term is up like a rocket, down like a feather. And it's where the retailer starts to make a little bit of money as the price is dropping. But the price set at the gas station on every corner is basically set by the owner of that gas station, and he has to compete, or she has to compete, with other gas stations in the neighborhood. So then they're not allowed to conspire. That's illegal. They cannot conspire to keep the prices up illegally. And sooner or later you're going to see somebody drop the price to increase their volume, and the others will follow. And it does come down slower generally because the retailers are trying to make some money, because the margins on gasoline, this is what many people don't understand, the margins on gasoline are so slim. If everybody's noticed, gasolines now have convenience stores. The money that most convenience or most gas stations make is at the convenience store, not so much at the pump, because the fluctuating price, they can never be sure what their margin's going to be. And if they're making somewhere between a nickel or 15 cents a gallon, which is 15 cents is a good deal of margin on a gallon of gasoline, they're not making much money off of it, so they sell other things to make money.
A couple of quick questions from Jim Cooper in Richfield, Connecticut. As India and China grow their demand for oil, at what level of cost will they want to start drilling for oil in their homeland? Does India have an oil reserve?
Well, China is building an oil strategic reserve, much like we do, but China has very limited amounts of oil that we know of. Now, China has natural gas, so the chances are they would be turning their natural gas into methanol or ethanol, and as we could be doing in this country with our vast amounts of natural gas. India also has very little oil, and what they have is mainly offshore, and so they're going to be needing oil imports for a long time to come, as will China, as will the United States. We're all competing for imports, which keeps pressure on the prices.
Steve, joining us from Cottonwood, Arizona. Good morning, Independent Line.
Good morning. How are you? Yeah, I've been sitting here listening to this, and there's one thing I haven't heard yet, and this is the main reason our prices is the EPA. The regulations they have is just phenomenal. I mean, they're putting the oil companies in a bad spot. I believe Newt Gingrich, you were talking earlier about California and the different blends and what the companies have to do to get those blends, why it's so much more expensive. Newt Gingrich says we should have just one blend for everybody.
It's interesting that you raised this, because the last time we saw the spike in gasoline prices in 2007, 2008, this whole issue of boutique blends, where there are today about 13 different blends that are designed in purpose to try to protect the air quality because of high altitude or low altitude, high summer temperatures, cold winter temperatures. These different blends are intended to equalize air quality across the country. The argument made back then, which is the same argument coming forward now, is simplifying the boutique blends would actually lead to less expense in refining gasoline. And that's absolutely correct. If there were fewer blends required, refineries would not have to gear up for the various and sundry different kinds of blends. But some states won't go along with that. Some states, like California, for example, is adamant about the quality of their gasoline and the environmental emissions that would come from their gasoline. So if there wasn't an EPA rule, California would create its own rule. In fact, it already has. Other states with large population centers and dense accumulations of emissions, whether it's Phoenix, Arizona, or New York City, they want to have some say over it, and the EPA has largely responded to local requirements, local demands, to try to make that happen.
John Hofmeister, who is the former chief executive of the Shell Oil Company, your book out in 2010, Straight Talk from an Insider on the Price of a Gallon of Gasoline. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me,
Please come
Steve.
back again. We are going to turn our attention to Southern politics. Primaries Tuesday in Alabama and Mississippi. A new poll out today in Illinois showing that Mitt Romney is ahead slightly in that state as the road to the White House continues in March, with Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum battling it out for delegates. Tom Baxter is going to be joining us in just a moment from Atlanta. You're watching C-SPAN's Washington Journal. It is Sunday morning, March 11th. We're back in a moment.
C-SPAN's 2012 local content vehicle Cities Tour takes our book TV and American History TV programming on